What's going on, gang? What's going on? We are back on the couch, and today our episode is going to be a little more functional, meaning we are going to take a look at how to become or stay organized in our day-to-day life while healing from trauma and or going through trauma or stressful life events. Because remember, stressful life events can impact our body significantly as well and give us similar symptoms as trauma. So we're going to take a look at three things today. Three things: routines, habits, and planning. Now, I was prompted to do this episode because I often see this happening with clients that I treat in the trauma center or within the outpatient center, where they're struggling to stay on task, to remain focused. They have difficulty with organization, and they often report feeling overwhelmed and scattered. So you will see clients just having difficulties with getting to appointments or remembering appointments, or just day-to-day routine things that someone who may not have experienced a traumatic event or who may not be going through a stressful life event find to be very simple to get done. But with trauma, it can be much more difficult to do what we may think is a simple task. In addition, what also prompted me to do this episode was those of you that have been listening know that my family has experienced a lot of death over the last 6 months. And within that time period, I personally noticed how difficult it was to stay organized during those events. And so here we are. So once things slowed down, it's often a struggle for us to get back on routine or to even establish a routine. So I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to have a good discussion about this. However, I want to be really clear that maintaining some sense of organization actually aids in the healing and can buffer the effects of trauma and or stressful life events that we are enduring. So while we may feel like in the moment it's too much, actually trying to stay on routine actually helps us. It actually helps us. So all of that, here we are. I have my notes in front of me, so let's jump in. Now, some may argue that habits come before routines or routines come before habits. Whatever floats your boat, we're not going to go back and forth and debate this. Whatever floats your boat, just do it. Whatever works for you. Let's not get rigid about this thing. So what I'm offering today are some suggestions. Remember, there really isn't no right or wrong way to do this. But we're going to start today with discussing routines. First off, now routines are just a set of actions or behaviors that are frequently repeated. So I'm going to say that again. A set of actions or behaviors that are frequently repeated. Now, routines take conscious effort, whereas habits are more automatic. They happen unconsciously per se. Now, routines can be particularly useful when healing, especially from trauma, because consistent behavior facilitates a sense of safety. So with trauma, we often have this feeling of not knowing what's going to happen next or fear of what may happen next. So that can constantly keep us in the state of fight, flight, or freeze because we don't know what may be occurring on the next day. We may not know what may be occurring the next moment, or our perpetrator, what their moods are or how they're feeling, and it's not predictable. And when we are being traumatized, especially at the hands of an individual, instantly, sometimes we try to predict moods, and of course we know that's not possible all the time. And with trauma, sense of safety is very important in the healing process. Safe environments are extremely useful in the healing journey. We all want to feel safe. Even when we're not going through a particular healing process, safety is necessary in just producing healthy environments. Now, after a traumatic or stressful event happens, we struggle to organize, generally because of the logical brain, which is our frontal lobe, and we talked about this, has difficulty getting or staying online. The amygdala, which is our emotional brain, again, we talked about this in previous episode, tends to be over aroused, and we are often moving about and making decisions off of our feelings versus logic. And whenever we make decisions off of our feelings without including some logic, we are in danger of making a poor decision. So we want to have some balance with decision making. So all decisions aren't going to always be logical, but all decisions should never be based on just mere feelings, because feelings can always lead us down the wrong path. We have a lot of feelings to eat all types of different foods. And when we succumb to those feelings, we will gain a significant amount of weight. We will have high blood pressure. Our health numbers will not be what we need them to be because we base our eating habits off of feelings. Now, we've all had some binges and snacks, so no judgment here. But that's just an example of why we want to have some logic thrown in there with our emotions and balance that out. Additionally, because of the hyperarousal of the amygdala, we tend to become easily overwhelmed during these times. So remember, with trauma, the amygdala tends to be hyperaroused and it struggles to get to communicate with the logical brain. So that cycle, that circular motion, that circular communication that we've talked about in previous episodes is necessary. But with trauma, what often happens is that the frontal lobe shuts down, the amygdala takes over, and that communication is out of sync. And it takes longer for the frontal lobe to get back online so that it can be a nice synchronous, harmonious communication. So taking some time to establish a routine or to return to your routine may seem impossible because of those hyperarousal emotions that we just talked about, those things, those components that cause hyperarousal. However, even if you make your routine very simple, like wash my face, brush my teeth, make the bed, it can help in remaining organized and with the healing process. So it doesn't have to be a complicated thing. So let's not go off into a tangent of thinking, oh, routine, bang, bang, this is something that has to be monotonous or something that has to be complicated or difficult or stringent. No, routines are really relative, based on the individual, and it is based on your needs and how you function. So again, these are all suggestions and recommendations. So if you're listening and you know me or you work with me or think highly of my work, don't think that, well, Dr. Dawn said it has to be this way. No, that's not what we're saying here. We want you to make these routines based on your needs. All right, now, which leads me into my next point. You want to keep your routine very, very simple. So let's say you had a detailed 5-point morning routine prior to becoming traumatized or prior to this really stressful event that occurred. So this could be you had a traumatic event happen to you personally, or you may be going through an extremely stressful situation at work or within your home that you may not feel or define as trauma. Because remember, as we discussed in previous episodes, trauma is relative. It's relative. So what may be traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you, and vice versa. Okay, so let's say that in those moments, you in that time, prior to that traumatic event, you had a very detailed, 5-point morning routine. You got up, you did some things, 5 things you did, and you did it well, and you did it bang, bang, bang every day. So let's just say that was the case. While healing, though, it's okay to pause on some of those steps if you need to, until you feel up to going back to your full routine. So if you're in the healing process, it may be okay to say, I'm not going to do all 5 of those steps because I'm not feeling up to it. But it's better to put some of the steps on hold than to drop the entire routine altogether. So we do not want to drop the entire routine. But oftentimes that's what happens, especially when we're stressed out and especially after experiencing a traumatic event. We are overwhelmed. And we feel sometimes that we just can't do anything. The body feels paralyzed, and rightfully so. You're going through a lot. You're struggling to cope. That's the nature of a traumatic event. It does not speak to the type of person you are in terms of strength or weaknesses. It's just the nature of a traumatic event and how our particular bodies may be processing that event. Okay, so we may want to drop everything, but it's better just to put some things on pause than to drop everything. And so if you have a 5-point routine, consider going down to 2, 3, or even 1 of those pieces of your routine versus just dropping everything altogether. And we want to do this, 1, because we tend to beat ourselves up and be real judgy about not keeping our routines, and shaming ourselves is counterproductive to the healing process. Does not work. So we might think that, talking critically to ourselves or saying some mean, harsh comments to ourselves and all that type of stuff works. It doesn't. It doesn't. It's very counterproductive to the healing process. It doesn't help us heal in any type of manner. It doesn't facilitate healing. It doesn't bring about those natural hormones that we would like to have to expedite the healing process. So that's the first reason why we want to keep a little bit in, because when we stop, we tend to be really harsh on ourselves. 2, because maintaining some sense of normalcy during the stressful time, again, helps the healing process. So even though everything may be going awry, just having something that is part of our normal world, part of our normal time, really helps us stay grounded, and it helps facilitate that healing. 3, because completing the entire routine may feel too overwhelming at the time, and it may cause us to abandon everything altogether. So if you put pressure on yourself to get all 5 of your pieces done the next day after experiencing a very stressful event or a traumatic event, you may just give up on everything. Like, I just can't do all 5, so I won't do anything at all. So it's best to keep some small component of your routine. And again, that depends on how you're feeling, but try to keep something as best as possible in your routine. We don't want to lose all of it, because it tends to be more difficult at the end getting back in routine later when we are feeling better. So that's another part of this process, is if we abandon our routine altogether, then we'll struggle. Once we're feeling better, once we're coming out of coming out of our situation, or our healing is at another place in the journey, that we feel good. Because trauma doesn't last forever in terms of it cannot last forever. It doesn't have to last forever. So you can feel better and you can get better. And some people have reported trauma symptoms going completely away. So once you get to that space, if you have completely abandoned your routine, then you'll have a hard time getting back into it. It's much more difficult to get back into it. So do what you can. Whatever you feel up to doing, just do something. And remember, please remember to do it without judgment. Please do not be hard on yourself or critical on yourself. Give yourself some grace, because you are healing. All right, next, let's talk about habits. Now, habits can be defined as a set of practices that are often completed unknowingly, or in other words, on autopilot. So habits kind of happen subconsciously. We just automatically do it. Sometimes those habits are good. Sometimes those habits are bad. So if you notice within my podcast, I often do, that's a habit of mine, not a good habit. I have another one where I say right. That's not a good habit either. So, and if I'm not careful, I might move back and forth, rock my chair. Not a good habit. Don't even notice it until I listen later to it. So being aware of the fact that we have habits, good and bad, but they're very automatic. They're not like routines. They're not, see, habit. They're not like routines. Okay. So James Clear's book on atomic habits can provide you with more detail on habits. And I'll provide the link in the show notes later. But again, I want to make sure I define that for you one more time, because I kind of went through that fast. But habits can be defined as a set of practices that are often completed unknowingly, or in other words, on autopilot. So, subconscious might be a good word for that, subconsciously. Like you're doing it, but again, you don't know you're doing it. Now, James Clear's book is a very good book. I recommend that book to anyone that is, looking at their habits, trying to build habits, trying to get rid of habits. He wrote the book Atomic Habits. I believe he wrote it in 2017. And he gives a whole lot of detail. He also gives some free downloadable sheets that can be very useful in building some really good habits. And again, the link will be in the show notes. But habits, in his book, he discussed how tiny habits helped him recover from a serious injury. So we want to look at traumatic events as a serious emotional injury, as well as stressful life events. It's an injury. So tiny habits can help us recover as well from our trauma. It can help us recover from our stressful life event, whatever we may be going through that just may be overwhelming us in that moment. So during our healing process, we do want to add some tiny habits to our current routine. Now, you may be thinking, Dr. Dawn, you tripping because I'm overwhelmed as it is. You already told me to take, I could take some things out of my routine versus squashing my whole routine altogether. Now you're telling me to add some tiny habits. Oh, you tripping. But let me explain to you what I'm talking about before you stop listening to the video. So Clear states in his book that doing just a little each day can in the long run yield great results. Just do a little each day. Now, but we want to be patient in this process, because while we're doing a little each day, it may seem like we're making no gains. But keep in mind, slow and steady wins the race in this particular context. So slow and steady. So just a little bit each day. He says in his book, 1%. Now, we're not going to get down to the nitty gritty of numbers, but just a little bit each day. If you keep doing that, it builds up. So we want to pick something that we know to be useful in our healing process to add to our routine. Something very, very small, though. It could be something that you got from your therapist, something that you may have heard in a video from a respected therapist or expert in the field, such as myself. For instance, for many of my clients that are healing from trauma, I may suggest journaling. I may suggest walking. I definitely suggest meditation because of what we just talked about earlier, that connection between the frontal lobe and the amygdala, and trying to make sure that healing process is occurring as much as possible. And we know that 20 minutes a day of meditation can be beneficial for that. So I always recommend meditation as part of any regime that I'm doing with my clients. Now, while any one of those may seem simple, walking may seem simple, and meditation may not seem that difficult, and exercise may not seem that difficult. It can be very overwhelming to do those activities, though, when we're suffering with trauma symptoms or when we're going through something very, very stressful. And when you have trauma symptoms such as depression, flashbacks, panic attacks, anything like something simple that we may think is simple can be very overwhelming. So for journaling, for example, writing one sentence a day versus pages, or for walking 5 minutes a day versus 30 minutes are examples of just a tiny habit. Because if I assign to my client who is going through trauma symptoms, having severe PTSD symptoms, to walk 30 minutes a day, that may seem completely overwhelming, especially if there's some anxiety about being outside, some anxiety about trust, paranoia about people in the community, which is completely normal when healing from a traumatic event. 30 minutes outside walking may seem like too much. But if we break it up and say, how about you give me 5 minutes of walking, or 3 minutes of walking around the house, 2 minutes of walking around the house, whatever number might fit that client, or anything that you feel like you can do, just do it that day. That seems more doable versus a big number like 30. Now, as the healing process progresses, 30 minutes may be nothing. But right now, that could be very overwhelming for someone with trauma because, again, of the areas of the brain we talked about. Same thing with journaling. If I say start journaling and give me 2 pages, that's a lot. That's a lot. But if I say, hey, why don't you get up and just write one thing that you're grateful for, that could be the start of journaling. And if you feel any, and I often add, if you want to do more than one thing, go for it. Or if you want to add to that one thing, go for it. But for now, let's just start each day. Give me one thing that you're grateful for. That can be super helpful. And that's a tiny habit. And that's what I mean by something tiny. Then they can add that to their already routine. So if they had their 5-point routine, but they're healing and they decided I'm only going to do 2 things every day. And that might be I'm going to get up, I'm going to wash my face and brush my teeth. The tiny habit that they could add is for journaling, they could say, I'm going to write one thing I'm grateful for. There you have it. That's it. That's all she wrote and the pencil broke. The reason why we want to add the tiny habit is to add to help to increase and boost the healing process. And that's what we want to do. That's why we're here. That's why you're listening. That's why I'm here, so that we can help with the healing process and get as much information as possible on healing. So another example is meditation. Again, I told you 20 minutes is ideal, but that's big and that's a lot. Some people struggle with 20 minutes of meditation that don't have any trauma history. But if I say, give me 60 seconds of meditation, that may be more doable. Breaking the activity into very, very small pieces can remove some of the idea that an activity is too much or too big to get done. And that's the idea. We want to take away the overwhelmed piece as much as possible. But adding the tiny habit will, in the long run, impact our healing process over time. Again, be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, and remember you are healing. And so lastly on that list, we're going to talk about planning. Now, I love planning. I love the stickers. I love the books. I am a happy planner sister. Love, 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 love it. But I do want to say that planning can get complicated and can be very overwhelming. Because, again, you got all types of planners, you got stickers. It's so much that goes on with that. There's all types of, you could be a paper planner, you could have a digital planner, and there's tons and tons of videos on YouTube to explore. And sometimes when I'm looking for different pieces, that could be overwhelming. Just exploring the videos, all different types of ways of planning can be overwhelming just exploring. But planning can be as simple or as complicated as we like. So it doesn't have to be complicated just because there's complicated ways to do it or intricate ways to do it, or I call it creative ways, because there are so many creative ways to plan. Find what works for you. Find what works for you. Some use their phones. Some people use other digital devices. Some use paper. Some combine both digital planner with a paper planner, and they call that the hybrid system, or they generally call that the hybrid system. I personally am a hybrid system type. I use both. I combine digital with paper. I find it to be very efficient and effective for myself. But during the healing process, a calendar or planning, some type of calendar planning system of some sort can be extremely useful in organizing tasks and activities as well. Now, again, I can hear y'all saying, now she tripping again. Now, she already told me that I need a routine. Now she told me to add a tiny habit, but I broke it down for you. Broke it down. So, small things. Now she talking about planning. Now, let me explain with the planning thing. All of these processes that we're talking about today, you can build upon. So please don't jump in trying to go full throttle. So you don't have to do all of these tomorrow. If you're healing right now, you may just want to start off with you're making sure you do your routine. My 2-point routine tomorrow, I'm just going to make sure every day I brush my teeth and wash my face. And I know some people may be listening and saying, well, that's just what I do anyway. But when you are healing and you're hurting, and depending on who you are and how you've been impacted, brushing your teeth and washing your face can be really difficult to get done. It just can be. So everybody's at different places. So I'm using that as an example because I do serve some people that have been so traumatized that just doing that requires a lot of effort. I also work with depressed individuals that sometimes that depression hits so much that just that basic brushing teeth and washing the face is something that just is outside of their realm of possibilities right now. Okay. However, if you just say with that person, hey, just wash your face today. How about you wash your face for the next 2 days in a row? Just break it down smaller tasks, right? So you may be listening and you hear this and you're like, okay, so she said, do the routine. All right, I got my routine. I'm gonna brush my teeth and wash my face tomorrow. And then the next thing you say, well, she said add a tiny habit. Okay, I'm gonna write down one thing I'm grateful for. That's the tiny habit. Okay, great. The next thing, she's telling me to do planning. She done lost her mind. But hear me out. It doesn't have to be complicated. I'm not asking you to go out and buy a happy planner. I'm not asking you to do a 6-7 point multifunctional transformer planner. I'm not asking you to do any of that. I'm just saying it could be a calendar that you have on your wall. It could be your phone. Most of us have phones, and all of our phones come with calendars. I think it's absolutely amazing. I have one family member who has the latest smartphone and don't know how to use it. I mean, that's the whole point of a smartphone. However, some of us don't like to use our smartphones for planning. But if that's the best thing you could do because you don't have energy or you're not feeling up to going out and getting a calendar or using or writing on a calendar, use your phone. Whatever works, okay? But again, it doesn't have to be complicated. So hang in there with me, okay? But this process can be very useful, very useful. A planner is a really good place to schedule your routine and your habits that we talked about earlier. So that's a good place to write your things down all in one area so you can reference them easily. You could jot down meetings, appointments, track your symptoms. You can track the trauma symptoms each week. You will be able to see healing areas that you may want to work on or have a little bit more healing or see a little bit more healing in. It can help you really be grounded in where you at the moment and help you feel focused. Writing things down, being able to track things can really ground us and help us feel focused and organized. Just simple things. Utilizing calendars and planners are extremely helpful during stressful and traumatic times. It just really helps us hone in on priorities, things that might need to get done around the house that we usually do, but because we're going through something, it's just not happening like we would like. Remember, during these times, we tend to feel very scattered, and that scatteredness could lead to us just not being on task, and things that seemed so simple before just aren't simple anymore. And again, that is part of the traumatic experience, and that's part of the healing process. That is a normal part of the process. So you may as well befriend it. And when I say befriended, I mean accept that that's where you are right now in the process. That doesn't mean you're going to be there forever. And we're not saying accept that for the rest of your life. That we're not saying be stagnant. That is not the purpose of this. But fighting it and rejecting it or not realizing that these are some things that I need to do in order to feel better and be better is not going to help you. It's not going to help you. Okay. So let's be open and trying some new things, but also be kind to ourselves during this process. So if you're beating yourself up for not having the house as clean and tidy as it used to be, remember you're healing. Remember you're healing, and maybe add picking up one piece of clothing off the floor as part of your tiny habit. But again, be kind to yourself during this process. So it may seem easier to abandon everything during and after we experience a traumatic and stressful event. It may seem easier just to throw your hands up in the air and walk away. But in the long run, even if you shorten your routine until you feel better, you will find out that adding tiny habits and all of the things that we talked about today will facilitate healing. It will facilitate healing and actually help you feel better. And it can help expedite the process. And again, the timeline is relative. Everyone's healing journey is going to look different. Excuse me. So you want to tack on some simple planning. You want to make sure you have your tiny habit. And you also want to maintain as much as your routine as you possibly can. But you can pause some of the other pieces if needed be. All right. That's all I got.